Welcome to the BBC 5 Live preview of 2022. Last week we did the review of 2021 and what a year it was. But we move on from January 2022 until December the 31st, 2022. Now, every year I'm like to quote Mike Costello, I'm like a broken record. I keep telling people this is going to be a great year. Last year was great. This is going to be even greater. Well, I'm going to say it again. Last year was brilliant. This is going to be even better. It's going to be very special. I'm joined by the aforementioned Mr. Costello, still in the BBC building, still has his pass, which he keeps in a secret pocket. And once again, Carl Frampton, former double world champion. Fellas, welcome to the preview of 2022. Now, I'm going to put it out there straight away. I don't think we've ever had, Mike, a list of fights in bed as strong and as varied as we've got here. And I don't think we've ever had a list of fights that we know are as good as made. We're just waiting for dates.
Yeah, and I think it's a case of setbacks have become boosts for the early part of the year. Liam Williams against Chris Eubank should have happened towards the end of the year, and that's been put off until the early part of 2022. So it's those disappointments and those setbacks have led to a really exciting start to 2022. And we mentioned in last week's podcast, Steve, when we were looking back at 2021, how turning into the year, we were in this state of confusion and uncertainty. But that's not around at the moment. We're going to go on and talk about the heavyweights, and we think we might see Tyson Fury against Dillian Whyte, and we're pretty certain that we're going to see the rematch between Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk. There's a certainty around, Steve, as we head into the new year that just wasn't there last year. We can genuinely look forward to so many fights.
It's quite phenomenal what we've got. Let's start 26th of February up in Glasgow. A fight that should have taken place in the middle of December. Jack Catterall finally getting his chance to fight for the light welterweight championship of the world. In fact, it's all four belts because, of course, they're owned by Josh Taylor. It's a fight that should have happened in December. It's a fight that maybe should have happened last year. Jack Catterall worked some kind of deal where he stepped aside, allowing Josh Taylor to go ahead and fight Ramirez for all four belts. So full praise to Jack Catterall. He's waited his time. It's an odd fight because simply because Josh Taylor is so good as Jack Catterall is. Josh Taylor is just that good.
Well, just before we go into that, I think what I want to touch on is, we keep seeing on social media, boxing's done, boxing's dead, MMA is taking over. But the fights that we've already kind of not cemented, but almost as good as cemented in the next year coming up, they're massive. Boxing is alive and it's thriving, and this fight between Jack and Josh Taylor is a big fight, and I think it's a better fight than people are giving the credit for. We all know the superstar that Josh Taylor is, unbelievable fighter, and what he's done in such a short career. But I know these guys personally. I've trained alongside both of them in different gyms. Yeah. And I'm someone who I've been around boxing for so long that when you finish your training, you just want to get out of the gym. You want to go and stick a bit of Netflix on, watch TV, YouTube, whatever, and just forget about boxing. The only two guys that I've hung around for to stay and watch sparring is Josh Taylor when I was in London and Jack Catterall when I was in Manchester. Jack Catterall is one of the best I've seen in the gym. Unbelievable fighter, as is Josh Taylor, but he's proved it on the big fight nights as well.
Yeah.
So Jack has that in him. He has these big performances in him. He hasn't shown it yet on a fight night. I don't know whether it's making weight or what, but
he hasn't really had to.
He hasn't had to, but it's in there somewhere, and I think he's going to have to show it against Josh Taylor. Now, Josh is rightfully the favourite in the fight, and so he should be. But this isn't a one-sided fight like people think, and you have to have Josh as the favourite in the fight. It's a good fight. It's one that I'm very excited about, and I think it's going to be I think it'll be a war, an absolute war, really do.
Motivation is so important at that level, and if there's any kind of diluting of the motivation in Josh Taylor's mind, then that brings them closer together.
See what people forget about Jack? Jack, as a kid, was away sparring Canelo and Mayweather. He was doing all these sort of things as a young kid, learning his trade. He knows how to fight. Josh Taylor clearly knows how to fight, but that motivational factor that you're talking about, that might be something. I hope I'm wrong, where Josh isn't overlooking Jack. And if he isn't, this turns into
he was certainly on the trajectory, Jack Catterall, once. I don't want to speak historically. There was that point when he was taking care of good British fighters, doing good jobs on British fighters. But that seemed to be about 2018. I don't even know if that went into 2019. He's had a slow period here, and that's coincided with Josh Taylor's absolutely bionic period. Now, they came face to face in a press conference a few weeks ago, and I went down with young Jack and grabbed hold of the pair of them. And Catterall was, he was confident, no way, and he understands the task. But I grabbed hold of Josh, and of course, he was last week our British Fighter of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, and arguably the global Fighter of the Year. I think Canelo and Fury pipped him to that title. But I did give him the news that you might not have been nominated for Sports Personality, Josh, but trust me, you're our Fighter of the Year.
Thanks very much. About time, Steve. Thanks very much. Cheers, mate. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And that's because the Ramirez fight was exceptional. We did that live on Five Live. I want to take you back to that fight. And I know it was behind closed doors, but there still were a couple of Scottish fans inside the venue. What was it like in the days before and on the night? I know you've talked about it feeling like it was you against the world. Talk me through it.
Do you know what? It's because the preparations went so well and I visualised it so long. I knew I was winning the fight. I knew I was going to win the fight, and I visualised me knocking him out and knocking him down and different ways of winning the fight. But I just visualised it so much that I was going to win the fight, and going over there and actually having all the odds stacked against me in terms of we got from the start from the poster, Ramirez Taylor, and then it was go to Mexico for 2 weeks quarantine. And then it was the judges that I didn't really want, they picked. And then the referee that I didn't really want, they picked. And I just knew they were trying everything to put the odds against me. And getting that win was just was really sweet, because I know they tried their hardest to rob me of that victory, and they just couldn't do it. But it was good. It was a real good experience. And the fight itself, I just knew the way it was going to plan out. I knew the way he fights. Watched him over and over, and he bites when you feint him, and when you feint him he shells up, and then the minute you take away the feints, that's when he goes for you. And we knew we were going to walk him into a shot, use aggression against him, and that's what we did. And the fight played out exactly how we thought it was going to.
Now, we'll talk about Jack Catterall in a moment, but I'm going to ask you what I don't really like asking fighters, and I'm going to ask you to go look past Jack and look at the landscape, look at the fights that are possibly there. The Teofimo Lopez loss against George Kambosos, was that a bit of a blow for you? Because that was a nice rivalry you were building up with Lopez.
It wasn't a blow for me. I don't think that fight was going to ever happen anyway. I was obviously, given I get through Jack on February 26th, my ambitions was to move up in weight class anyway, vacate and move up. Could I be a potential career 140 pounder? Yes, probably could make it the rest of my career, but I've got no proving left to do at the weight. So move up and challenge for the second weight world title, try and achieve more titles and more accolades to my name. So that's what I want to do and cement my legacy. But yeah, it was actually quite a surprise for me that Lopez got beat.
Surprise for him.
Surprise for him as well. But this is what we're saying as well. We also thought he was overlooking him, but I still thought he would have got the win. So it was a surprise for me that he got beaten up. He actually got beaten up. So it was Kambosos was very impressive.
And the welterweight landscape's fantastic. 3 or 4 fighters out there.
Oh yeah, and I believe the welterweight division's the best division in the boxing at the minute. You've got Terence Crawford, Jarrell Spence, he's recently retired Porter, which I believe he was an animal as well. You've got your Keith Thurmans. My hero's just vacated, he's expired as well. So, but yeah, the talent, the pool of talent up at welterweight is unbelievable. We've got Ugas there as well, who's a great fighter. So the potential with all these big massive fights is mouth-watering, and it's hard not to get excited, but it's all at the back of the mind.
And you've been brilliant the way you've rationalised not looking past Jack Catterall, by the way. And I mean you have been brilliant, because our sport is littered with guys that should not have lost under any circumstances and have lost. And they always lose to a guy like Catterall, a guy that does everything well but nothing exceptional. You know what I mean by that? He's not a massive knockout artist. He's not known for being elusive and slippery, but he comes in 100%. So in that sense, I'm assuming that you've got to do exactly what Ben Davison said you would do, is treat him like the best fighter on the planet.
Yeah, of course, because he's coming to take what I've got and what I've worked so hard for. And I've achieved what I've achieved by beating champion after champion and undefeated fighter after undefeated fighter. He's getting the chance to do it in one fight, which makes me angry. Which makes me angry, that he's challenging for my belts and he's a big threat to my goals and ambitions that I want to do. So I'm treating him like he's the best fighter on the planet. So that's what I believe he's going to become, and definitely going to be given his best game. He's going to be in the most he's ever been up for a fight. So he's giving it his all. He's hungry. So I need to just be still as hungry as him, and I am. So I just believe on the night though is if I'm on my night and I turn up, I don't believe he gets anywhere near me.
Josh Taylor there talking about his massive full unification fight with Jack Catterall, because that would be the first time that the 4 belts have been contested in a British ring.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, a bit of history. 26th of February up in Glasgow. It'll be a sellout, guaranteed sellout, and it will be very emotional. Be a special night, actually. Mike, I'll take you to the week before that, the 19th of February in Manchester. Took something like 6 minutes and 24 seconds to sell out. You know where I'm going to go. We've had this conversation about 7 or 8 times in the last 7 or 8 years. It's finally on. Kell Brook against Amir Khan. I'm delighted. I'm delighted.
I love the fight, and
Me
I love
too.
what it does for boxing as well. As Carl was saying, the sport is absolutely thriving at the moment, and there are too many snipers ready to dig, whether it's Jake Paul or it's a fight like this that's happened so far too late. I get all that, and it's a fight that I'd love to have seen in 2017 and 2018. But I was talking about this to a great friend of mine, Mickey Cantwell, just recently, and he said that around this fight, when he talks to general sports fans, football fans, darts fans, whatever, they love the fight. When he talks to boxing,
sold out.
When he turns to boxing fans, they turn their noses up at it. So you cannot deny that this fight has an appeal. Look how quickly it sold out in just minutes in the massive arena where we've just seen Derek Chisora and Joseph Parker. That place takes some selling out. He's done it, the fella next to us, but it takes some, those tickets take some shifting. And the noise there is incredible. There's something about the acoustics in that arena, going all the way back to just, so many great fighters have fought there. Yeah. It's going to be a great night. And maybe I know we use the example right at the top of the mountain, if you like, of old men producing or fighters past their best producing something special. The Thriller and Manila and Ali and Frazier back
Absolutely.
in 75. It can happen when if they've slowed down at the same level. And I just think it's absolutely fascinating. And by the way, at the moment, unless you've been anywhere near their camps, I'm not listening to anybody give me any kind of clue as to who's going to win the fight. And I think that's one of the fascinating factors around the fight, is that you've just got no idea what either of them has got left or what they're producing in the gym and what they're going to do in the next couple of months.
Because you can't work on form. So I've had the same thing. I've had a dozen or 2 dozen people ask me over the last 3 or 4 weeks who's going to win that fight, who do you fancy in that fight? And I say the same thing. I want to see them. I mean, I might not make a decision until the day of the fight. I might look how they've responded after weighing in. I want to see the 2 of them in the gym, Carl, because we don't know what they've got left. And I'm not sure who it was on the one of the pods that we did in early December. It might have been George Groves and it might have been Barry Jones, but both of them, or one of them, made a very good point about both of these boxers. They said, providing they get through their training camps. Now, that, in theory, might favour Brook, because he's been in a proper training camp in the last 15 months, whereas Amir Khan's not been in a proper training camp since March and April of 2019. So it might just give Kell the advantage in the sense that his body's been where he's having to take it in more recent times than Amir Khan.
Yeah, and I'm a bit like you. I don't know who's going to win this fight, and that's why it's an interesting fight, isn't it? And like you said, Mike, I haven't really spoke to anybody who has a definitive winner, and I think a lot of people are saying, well, first half, if Kell Brook will probably have to knock him out in the first half. If not, then Khan will get to him at some point, and he'll pepper him and stuff. That's the sort of theories that I'm hearing. But boxing diehards, as we call them, I hate using that term, but these guys that call themselves, I'm a boxing diehard, you're a casual. They're odd. They're odd people, and to turn your nose up at this sort of fight, this is a fantastic fight. Still, it is.
Absolutely.
It was a better fight 5 years ago, but these guys are at a similar sort of level in their career where both of them aren't as good as they used to be, but it still makes for a cracking fight.
But they aren't as good together.
Yeah.
Which is that's a perfect analogy.
And being cynical, I think it'll happen because there's a lot of money at stake here. Unless they can't walk to the ring or they can't hold their hands up, this fight is going to happen.
Hey, listen, I've seen Bermain Stiverne challenge for a version of the World Heavyweight title when he couldn't walk to the ring. He literally couldn't walk to the ring. Once he was in the ring, he was a bit of muscle memory before he got smashed to bits, if I'm not mistaken. It's really interesting because Josh Taylor and Jack Catterall was meant to happen in December 2021, and maybe it should have happened in late 2020. Brooke against Calm was meant to happen at any time between 2017 and when it's finally going to happen. And the third fight of the four that are in bed at the moment, Chris Eubank Jr. against Liam Williams, was meant to happen on December the 11th. There was a fantastic press conference in London where Eubank was in fine form and Williams was a little bit odd. And the fight was basically called. It was one of those fights. I think the fight was called off before Jack and I, who was with me that day, had finished it. We went to Borough Market and got some really fancy. I don't know what we have. What do we have, Jack? That day it was really weird. Oh yeah, we had a really fancy. It was a chicken sandwich, but I don't call it a chicken sandwich in Borough Market. It was the most ridiculous thing. It was absolutely beautiful. So Jack and I go to the press conference. We're sitting down by the Thames eating our fancy chicken sandwich, and I get word the fight's off. We hadn't even recorded the opening of the pod. So actually, we completely wasted a day, but it was a lovely chicken sandwich in the sun. So the point I'm making is that you're right about the start of the year. The first three fights at the start of the year, they really shouldn't even be at the start of this year. But let's look at that. In Cardiff, 29th of January, Chris Eubank Jr. against Liam Williams. Liam Williams pestered him, drove him crazy, and Chris Eubank Jr. accepted the challenge. This one here, Carl, does it have the prospect of being a really good fight, or will it turn into a fight that we don't want to see?
I think of the fights that you've just mentioned, that for me will probably be the best one. I think it's an amazing fight. I think both guys are good, exciting fighters. I don't know whether or not they'll be ever world champions, if I'm being brutally honest. We've seen Liam Williams, I suppose, being exposed to a certain extent against Andrade.
Yeah. The forgotten fight of 2021, that, by the way.
But I think that they're well matched. I think that both of them are tough. Both of them are hard men. They'll both really want to win this fight. And whatever, there's a lot of criticism thrown at Chris Eubank Jr., but he is a hard man. He's extremely fit. Like his dad, tough as nails, really tough as nails. I think this has the makings to be an unbelievable fight. And out of the ones that you've mentioned, although they're all potentially unbelievable fights, this one for me, I think, will be the best.
I think this will be a defining fight for Chris Eubank. And
that's a really good point.
Some are saying that this might be overplaying it. And the reason I think so is because if he loses, he'll be remembered for this fight, among others, the George Groves fight and others. But if he loses against Liam Williams, this will be a stick to beat him with way into his retirement. If he wins, he's not going to actually get a lot of credit.
And Williams will do that, by the way. He'll remind them about it in 20 years' time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, we mentioned the fight there, a sort of forgotten world title challenge by a British boxer last year, Liam Williams against Andrade, where he got, we did it live on 5 Live, as you know, and he got beat. Let's get it right. He got handily beat. So that would be in the back of. I know fighters often deny it, but that would be in the back of his mind. I think Chris Eubank Jr. will know he's got to do a decent job. Listen, it's entertaining to have Chris Eubank Jr. back and Brooke and Khan. It's like the old days, isn't it? It's like all our yesterdays. It really is. Now, one fight we missed out there, and he'll be leaving for America, leaving for New York very early January. Callum Johnson getting a from nowhere crack at Joe Smith for the WBO light heavyweight title. I think we're in don't blink land here, Mike, to put it mildly. And it's one of those fights that's definitely going to be forgotten when we sit down in 12 months' time. But it might just be a 4 or 5 round classic.
Which is what it's got to be.
It has to be,
if Callum Johnson is going to win it, because he's been so inactive in recent times that he's going to be really, really up against it. But I almost chuckle when I look at Joe Smith Jr. and the great domestic scene we have here, and the only light heavyweight champion that's ever mentioned is Joe Smith.
No
one's going after Beterbiev and no one's going after Bivol. They're going after Joe Smith. It's like there's a queue of British fighters to get to Joe Smith first.
About 7 of them.
If Callum Johnson doesn't do it, then Anthony Yard will join the queue, and then Joshua Buatsi will go on behind him. Mm-hmm. So I find that quite interesting that they all see Joe Smith as the beatable of the world champions. And I think for everybody around Callum Johnson, there's a real danger of that. There is a real danger that they just look at him as the weakest of the world champions, and therefore that translates into weak. And I don't think that's the case.
Now, and just listen, I know this is the preview show, not the review show, but perhaps we should have mentioned on last week's show, and I'm not sure who to blame, but I'll blame someone, and it won't be myself. I can tell you this now. We maybe should have mentioned Craig Spider Richards and the 12 rounds that he put Dimitri Bivol through on one of those behind closed doors shows at Wembley. Really pushed him, and then Bivol was pushed later in the year as well, by the way. Beterbiev still the beast he is, and you're absolutely right. They're queuing up, Carl, to fight Joe Smith, and Callum Johnson's got the call. 3 or 4 or 5 round shootout seems to be the thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it goes into the second half of the fight even. 2 big punchers, 2 aggressive fighters. I think that Callum Johnson, he admitted himself, but he was very disappointed in his last fight. The opponent was really negative, but he was a good fighter and he knew his way around the ring. But Callum,
and he got the rounds though.
Yeah, he got the rounds in, which was important, but it wasn't a performance that Callum or his team would be happy with. But maybe Joe Smith's looking at that thinking, this guy's done now. Maybe he takes his foot off the gas a little bit. But I just think it's just the styles that these guys have and their punching power and the knockout ratios. I think it's if it goes past 6 rounds, either way, I'm going to be shocked, and I don't really know who's going to win it either. I think I don't know who's going to win it.
You know what? I mean, listen, I was with Callum Johnson a couple of weeks ago. In fact, a few days before Derek Chisora fought against Joseph Parker, and his head's in the right place and his body's in the right place. But there again, I've seen lots of fighters whose heads and bodies are in the right place before fights, and it hasn't worked out. But just allow yourself to think for a little bit, because we are previewing, and therefore there is a little bit of fantasy and dream. We're in dream territory. If he does win, Callum, he comes back into that crowded light heavyweight marketplace. Of course, he's got Yard on his doorstep, same promoter. But the others are 2 or 3 out there. We might finally see Joshua Buatsi. Let's throw his name out there. Let's stick with the light heavies. We might finally see Joshua Buatsi in what we want to see him in. And I was reminded of that when I was sitting at ringside commentating on Parker and Chisora, because you had Buatsi as part of your team for DAZN, and he was like 3 feet from me, and one of his hands or wrists is in some sort of splint, and I was thinking, boy, oh boy, Josh, we've been waiting a long time to see something from you, son. So just a couple of thoughts on that whole light heavyweight British situation.
Just an aside as well. I was working, as you say, with Joshua Buatsi on DAZN, and he said watching, and I want to get you to come in on this, Carl. He said that watching Parker and Chisora has made him fully understand what you have to produce, the demands that are made on you as a professional fighter. It's suddenly being 2 feet from the ring apron came home to him on that night. Just what he might have to do, where he might have to go to get to the very top, and even to stay at the very top. Was there that kind of moment in your career when you suddenly were dealt that card that said, this is what you've got to do?
Well, yeah, there was for me, but just before I go on that I spoke to Jack about that last night, that comment that Buatsi made. You had told Jack that what he had said, and I kind of got a sense of that as well. It's not very often I get to sit that close. I do my work for BT, and I'm up in a studio way back somewhere else, but
there was nothing between us and the ring.
No,
we could touch the canvas. Yeah.
And to see how brutal it is at times, and they're big men, I suppose that has an effect too, but you really appreciate how hard this game is. But there was a point for me where it kind of, in my career, when I thought, right, I know I have what it takes to become a world champion now, and it was when I fought Kiko Martinez the first time for the European title, and it was a tough, grueling fight, and I stopped him in the 9th round. But I remember going into the fight, anybody that spoke to says, be clever for 4 rounds and he'll slow down, he'll be okay.
They have nothing left then.
And I remember coming out, for the 8th and 9th and going, this guy hasn't slowed down one bit yet. What are you talking about? And I hit him with a shot, and he tried to get back to his feet, and the referee counted him out. But that was the moment for me when I realised you can do it in the gym, and you can spar, and you can spar hard, and you can tough it out and be macho. But until you do it on a fight night, and you don't know yourself whether you have that to get to the very top. And there's some fighters, when Kiko Martinez he's hit me, he's busted my eardrums, my hands are sore, he's hurt me to the body, he's cut me. When he's doing that, there's some fighters who may have just said, I've had enough here, I don't want to do this, but I stayed in, and that was the moment for me. I realised I've got the bottle to become a good fighter and a world champion.
And you worked it out for yourself, because you've been told that Kiko Martinez would die after 4, and he's still there, and he's still strong after 4. Yeah. So you worked that out. I'll never forget Amir Khan telling me that Freddie Roach, throughout the build-up to what I thought was one of Amir Khan's best performances, it might yet be his best performance against Marcus Maidana. Yeah. And again, in perspective, as we said on last week's podcast, Absolutely. That result looked so good when he went on to do what he did against Mayweather times 2. And Freddie Roach in the build-up had said to him repeatedly, Maidana's got no jab. Don't worry about it, he's got no jab. And Amir Khan said to me at lunchtime the following day, and he was really confused about it because he so looked up to Freddie Roach, and he said he was using this jab and bouncing my head off my shoulders. He had a brilliant jab, the best jab I've faced. And so, you know, there are times you have to, that's when you have to work it out for yourself. Even the so-called genius of the ring apron didn't see what actually you experience in the ring, you know?
I wonder when Amir Khan realised what the boxing business was all about. I wonder if it was the night he got beat by Brennis Prescott in the Manchester Arena, or if it was that night against Madonna, or if it was the night he chased, or the afternoon he chased Mario Kindeland all around the ring in Athens. It'd be interesting to talk to him here. Maybe we'll get the chance to do that in the build-up to Brook and Khan. Now we can do a couple of things here, fellas. We can talk about the women's fights coming up, because that's not just the women's fights coming up. It's the 3 or 4 massive ones that are in bed, or as good as in bed. We're waiting on dates. Or we can deal with the heavyweights, the 2 or 3 that are made at the moment, and 1 or 2 that we'd like to see made. Cole, you choose. Which one of those 2 sections do you want to approach next?
Let's go with the girls, because everybody knows all about the heavyweights and the potential super fights, and we're going to get there, but there's some big fights in female boxing at the minute to be made. And Serrano, Katie Taylor being the first one that springs to mind.
Madison Square Garden.
Katie Taylor, a hero in Ireland and the UK as well, I suppose, but on the east coast of America, she is a big name. And Serrano, who is an incredible fighter and doesn't get what she does in terms of going up and down the weight divisions. When you actually look at it, I knew she was a multi-weight world champion, but the way she done it, she started heavy, went down, went back up to. It's insane.
20 odd pounds.
You couldn't do it. There's not a man on the planet.
No man's ever done it.
Yeah. And there isn't one that could do it.
No, I agree.
So I think that's an incredible fight. You've got Chantel Cameron coming up against Kaylee Reese. That's in that kind of final.
So that unifies the 4 belts, and I love the way they've done that. Just 2 semi-finals to 2, 4 champions against each other, leaving 2 of them. Yeah, I like that one. I know you've shared the gym with Chantel.
Yeah, Chantel,
Cameron.
and I tell you a fight that I would love to see, and I don't know if it'll ever happen, but if Chantel gets through this fight and wins it, which I think she will, Chantel and Katie Taylor.
Yeah. I love that
huge fight in the
UK. There seems to be a reluctance. I mean, we're talking about it here, but there seems to be almost a reluctance. I mean, Chantel's mentioned.
She doesn't get mentioned. She doesn't get mentioned by.
Why not? Why? Because we talk about Katie moving up to some sort of catchweight fight with Jessica McCaskill, who she's already beaten, who's now the welterweight champion, and we talk about Katie doing this and Katie doing that. It wasn't that long ago we were talking about how Katie and Claressa Shields could fight each other at some kind of ridiculous 149 poundage thing. These are conversations we've had. Why don't we have the Chantel Cameron and Katie Taylor fight chat? Because I'll go to you first, Mike, because why isn't that the chat that we're all having?
Because for so long, around that weight in particular, lightweight, light welterweight, it's been Katie Taylor and the rest. Just Katie Taylor and the rest. If Chantel Cameron beats Kaylee Reese, becomes the undisputed champion, and if Katie Taylor beats Amanda Serrano, the narrative is set. And that's when the amplification will come around, that Chantel Cameron is a worthy challenger. I say challenger, she'll bring 4 belts to the table. And don't forget, Katie Taylor has already moved up just the once to win a light welterweight belt and then relinquished it. And it's a belt that I think is now going to be won by Chantel Cameron. But I think that the noises will get louder if they win, as Carl says, they each win those respective fights. I think it's if it's not certain, it's very, very close to certain to happen. If they both win those fights, I'm seeing a big summer fight.
Now, as entertaining as they are, and a big summer fight would be fantastic, I've got a soft spot, as you all know, for Savannah Marshall. She's one of my favourite fighters, male or female. And that Claressa Shields fight looks like, well, we thought it was definitely going to happen. It looked like they were both going to be fighting on the same bill at one point, on some sort of show that was going out, I think, on Channel 5. They both felt that fell through. Savannah did a deal, moved away to a different company, and it was all a bit up in the air. But as far as I can make out, Mike, and I'm asking a pair of you, is the Savannah Marshall Claressa Shields fight still on track to happen in April, May or June? I don't know. I can't know everything.
Yeah, I don't know exactly when, but I think that's, again, it's a fight that's inevitable. And I think for both of them, it's the biggest money fight out there. And look, they are professionals, you know, as well as getting prestige. They want to earn money. And the biggest money fight out there for Claressa Shields, the biggest money fight out there for Savannah Marshall is that one. And I think it will happen. And I think it's important also for the development of women's boxing. And you know, this year will now be the 10th anniversary of, for me, the whole sport coming alive when it was introduced for the first time at the Olympic Games at London 2012. And we're now starting to see the fruits of that Olympic competition. We were talking about last year, Steve, watching the World Youth Championships, where it seemed like the standard was beyond anything we'd seen from boxers that young.
The women's youth is just sensational
on the women's scene. Yeah. And so it seems like now that, you know, I always said that if the base of the pyramid is not heavily populated, then it's much easier to get to the top. Yeah. And you know, what women's boxing is needed is the different rungs in between. There's such a distance between the very best,
but they're filling in now.
The rest. I mean, you've got women. I saw one in Mexico a few weeks ago. You've got women who are winning world titles, who genuinely do not have some of the basics. I mean, like tripping over their own feet. And really, it's
fighting for versions of titles,
and it's like it's the kind of truth you're not allowed to speak.
You've done it, son. You've just done it.
But that's what's happening. And look, we've seen enough, and we know a little bit about what we're looking at, and I just think that, you know, that with that pyramid now becoming more heavily populated, and that's why I think at the top end, when you see the likes of Savannah Marshall against Claressa Shields, and you'll see hopefully Taylor against Chantel Cameron, then those are the showcase events that show just what the quality is, and the youngsters coming through then are inspired by what they're seeing.
But I think what you have to give the females credit, because the top girls, the top ladies, for the most, are fighting each other in the divisions, and I suppose we've talked about Chantel and Katie. Chantel not getting mentioned as much, but I think that fight probably will happen if both win their next fight. Claressa Shields and Savannah, I think that'll happen as well. And something where the men can be criticised a little bit for having fights a little bit later than they should have happened. Mayweather, Pacquiao, prime example. Khan, Brook that we're talking about. The females are fighting each other when they're in their primes, and that's something that we have to.
And I will point out also, Steve, that, you know, having dug out some of these, you know, high-ranking women fighters for lacking in technique, there is tremendous resilience there and determination to keep it going all the way to the final bell. So many of these world title fights go the whole
full
distance,
10
and a lot of the cases are because the woman on the receiving end has been so brave.
Could I? It might be the ideal time to just mention the Olympians from last year, and in particular, 3 of the 4 women. Charlie Davison, the Olympian, is probably going to stay at flyweight or whatever weight is the Olympian that the IOC allow for Paris. But the other 3, Caroline Dubois has turned professional. We know that Lauren Price, the gold medalist, and we know that Karis Artinstall, the bronze medalist, will turn professional. I think and just quickly for the pair of you, I think the injection of those 3 quality, seasoned campaigners, I think they can create a incredible scene, and very quickly. I think they get parachuted in at a very good level, Carl.
Yeah, and I think that it's important that we have these top quality amateurs turning over. Katie Taylor has always been the lead lady globally for me. I think that she's done so much for female boxing,
absolutely,
on a global scale. But it's important now that you have these Olympians turning over. You have people like Chantel Cameron and Savannah Marshall and all these other ones bubbling under the surface, because it's a sport. Female boxing is on the rise, and it's rising pretty quickly. But it's important that we have these people to fill in. Katie Taylor's not going to be around forever, and she's a hero to so many people. But it's important that there's someone to fill her boots, and we've got a good crop that's just behind her.
And it's this generation that we'll be talking about, as you say, Carl, in 2025 and 2026. And they might have been long reigning champions by then. But I like what I saw coming out of the Olympic Games, and I've long since on this podcast been championing the cause of Caroline Dubois, and I happen to think that the professional game will suit her more so than the amateurs.
And Mike, in your absence, I had to go up to GB all on my own and speak to some of the boxers. I spoke to Delicious Ori, who won a gold medal at a tournament in Belgrade at the end of last year. I liked him an awful lot. In fact, I really liked the kid. And I spoke to Lewis Richardson, and no relation, I spoke to Gemma Richardson. If you remember rightly, when we were up at the GB squad in the summer interviewing the Olympians before they went out to the Olympics.
We watched the video, didn't we?
She was winning. No, I think we're watching it live from somewhere. She was winning the European Under-22 tournament.
You're right.
And she won it live. And we spoke to her, this woman, Gemma Richardson, who walked into the gym because she wanted to be Katie Taylor a few years ago when she was only a child. She's only about 21 now. I like her a lot. And in fact, we don't do tips on the BBC. We're probably not allowed. I'm not sure. But if you do like a flutter, I'm allowed to mention it. Everyone knows people gamble. Put a tenner on Gemma Richardson to win a gold medal in Paris. Just go to your bookies and ask him for the odds. I'm telling you, I like her an awful lot, the girl. We'll move on from that. The big lads. We haven't got the exact dates, but we know it's happening. Eddie Hearn told me in the ring when I was talking to him after the Parker and Chisora fight. He said it in the ring. Alexander Usyk, Anthony Joshua 2. That's sometime in April. Tyson Fury, Dillian White. That's sometime in March. 2 massive fights. Imagine if they're separated by 14 days. What kind of land have we strolled into? We're in fantasy land.
I know, and when you consider back, and we mentioned this last week, but you consider the middle of last year in May, June, July, when we were being led to believe that the fight is going to happen. And at one stage, it was absolutely nailed down, wasn't it, for Saudi Arabia, August the 14th, because I remember thinking, I'm going to have a problem getting there from the Olympic Games because of quarantining and all that sort of stuff. So... And then for that fight to fall through, and we thought that the heavyweight division had absolutely collapsed.
Imploded.
And it was just underlining all that was wrong with the sport of boxing. And I distinctly remember feeling really low about it. We talked about it as potentially one of the low moments of the year, one of our categories last week. But now, after the fortnight in September and October, when Usyk beats Anthony Joshua and then Fury and Wilder produced that one for the ages, inside a fortnight, suddenly the heavyweight division is as alive as it's been since the days of Evander Holyfield and Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe. Back again. Everybody's talking about the heavyweight division. And that's great for the sport.
And it's closer to us, no disrespects. Carl, okay, I'm going to come to you. How would Usyk and AJ end the rematch? Because as I mentioned on last week's pod, every single part of Anthony Joshua's body was criticised and ridiculed.
Yeah,
everything was questioned.
The tactics need to be different. He needs to use his size. He needs to use his strength and his athleticism as well. He needs to kind of look at what helped Vladimir Klitschko hold on for the world title for so long. He'd hit people and he'd push them down and he'd make them tired, and that's something Joshua can do. And if he uses them tactics, he's every chance of winning this fight. Okay. Every chance of winning this fight. I don't know if that's going to be the case. We look at Usyk and Chisora, and Derek gave Usyk some problems. And Derek isn't the fighter that AJ is. He's a good fighter, but AJ's a better fighter. But the tactics were so wrong in that fight. It needs to be flipped on its head. I think that Usyk will know that. He'll be preparing for that. And I think Usyk is improving as a heavyweight fighter. Let's not forget, it wasn't that long ago he was the unified cruiserweight champion. Now he's up at heavyweight and he's getting better. His body's getting stronger. He's getting bigger. It's a difficult fight to call, isn't it?
Well, not according to some people.
Yeah, I know.
I'm with you, but most people seem to think that Usyk will win every second and smash Joshua to bits. As I said on the show last week, Mike, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but it seems every single aspect of Anthony Joshua's boxing life, private life, the way he prepared, everything was ridiculed, destroyed, dismissed. People were outraged. People were unbelievably abusive towards him. What say you, Mike?
I think what Anthony Joshua needs to do is to clear what seems to be the fog in his head at the moment.
Yeah.
He's done a couple of interviews recently with IFL TV where there have been contradictory statements within the same interview. For example, he talked about just getting back to absolutely basic boxing and going in there and smashing him about the ring, and then spoke about going to the United States to learn from a genius of a trainer. So which way round is it? Yeah. And when we're talking about the fight and potentially how it might end, again, going back to what I said about Brook and Khan, there are so many uncertainties around Anthony Joshua. I'd want to know who he's training with and what kind of training
and
he's
how
doing.
He's sparring.
How he's sparring, that sort of thing, before you make any kind of reasoned judgment. And we were talking to him on the podcast. You did a terrific interview with him a few weeks before I left the podcast in the build-up to that fight in September. When it was first announced, you spoke to him, and he seemed to be really obsessed about southpaws. And I remember saying to you, Steve and Carl, I was in the company of the late Alan Minter years and years ago, and somebody around, there was a coach alongside. It was an amateur tournament, was trying to be quite clever about how he taught his boys to beat southpaws. And he said, of course, when you meet someone like you, Alan, a southpaw, all it needs is the straight right hand down the middle, bingo, like that. And Alan just kind of leant back and chuckled. And he said, well, don't you think the straight left works for me against all your orthodox boys? And he just sort of chuckled. And I thought of that in the first few seconds of the fight between AJ and Usyk. And Usyk lands this left hand very early in the fight. And there was a look on the face of Anthony Joshua.
We both saw it. No one told me that.
No one told me that happened.
No one told me it could hurt me.
Where did that come from? And I just thought, if you'd been preparing with this obsessive attitude to southpaws, how were you so surprised? Was it the speed? But it was almost just that pinpoint left hand straight down the middle, and it kind of took him by surprise so early on. All of that cloud has got to be removed, I think, and living life by slogans on the back of a tracksuit. I don't know. I just think he needs to get back to just that natural fighting man.
Yeah, you know what, Carl? I'm going to come to you, but Mike's absolutely right. Okay, there was a look on his face, and it lasted a second, but it was one of those Matrix moments where it lasted forever, and it told the story of the fight. What happened here? No one told me. No one told me he could do that. And what really surprised me, Carl, was when I saw his list of sparring partners, and they were ideal for if you were preparing for a dancing master, and you were a dancing master. But Lawrence Okoli was like the biggest and the most rugged. There were all sorts of ridiculous sparring partners in there, light heavies and very tall cruisers. The idea was that he wouldn't be able to get to Usyk. And what was missing from that, and I've discussed it with Lennox Lewis. I had a couple of hours with Lennox Lewis when I was out for the Fury Wilder fight, and Lennox was going for a winner, and Lennox was saying, where were the big guys? Because what Lennox used to do was he'd have special sparring partners tailored for the opponents, but then he'd have the other guys who paid an awful lot of money who got the call, and they just got beat up for days and days and days. You talked there about he could possibly do it. Were you shocked in the first fight, though, Cole?
I was really shocked. It was bizarre, and I think most boxing, and I know boxing. There's people looking at that thinking, well, AJ's just not that good, and that's wrong. He's an Olympic gold medalist. He's a very good fighter. He was a world champion inside a handful of fights. He's a very good fighter, but it was bizarre tactics, and I think that people make mistakes and people get it wrong sometimes, but how they got that so wrong is team.
So wrong.
It baffles me. It doesn't make sense to use them tactics against Usyk, and for that reason alone, I think there needs to be a complete overhaul of his team. I think he's talked about going to America. I think he should do it. I think he needs to go to America. AJ can't do anything in the UK. He's an absolute superstar.
Yes.
He's still pretty famous in the States, but he could walk to the shop and he could do things, and he's not going to be hounded constantly like he is over here. I think he needs to go to America. He needs to get with a coach who's aggressive, has an aggressive style, and he needs to do it soon. This fight's creeping up on us. It's going to happen pretty soon.
Yeah.
He needs to be out there linking up with this guy and learning right now.
So just quickly, you think he could win, Carl? And Mike, what do you think?
I'll go back to what I said about Amir Khan and Kell Brook. I can't see how you can make a reasoned judgment
until you know
until you know who he's with and what sort of setup they've got and what the plans are through through the camp.
Well,
because I think there's a certainty about what we're going to get from Usyk.
Yeah,
although again, going back to what Carl said, a certainty, but he's getting better. Yeah. And becoming more acclimatized to the heavier poundage.
I just think one thing. If I'm in the Anthony Joshua club, I'm getting all of those negative comments that were made online, on radio, in the print. I'm getting them already for what would be a crowning moment of redemption, even in a business that deals with redemption. If he pulls it off and gets to Usyk and jumps all over him, that would be some night. And I'd just play out every single one.
Hey, and how big is Joshua against Fury then?
Oh, Mike, that moves us smoothly moved along there, Mr. Costello. Fury and White. There was some debate about whether the WBC would order it. They did order it. Dillian's been waiting a long while with the interruption of the Povetkin loss, then the Povetkin win. There's still a massive dispute over the split of the funds for this fight, what percentage Dillian's getting. But in theory, it's in April. How does it work out, Carl?
It's another fight that gets us all excited, isn't it? And like you said, if it's separated by a couple of weeks between Usyk and Joshua, then it's just a mammoth few weeks for boxing and British boxing. I don't think this is as hard a fight to call as Usyk AJ, and I think that the only issue might be that Fury maybe overlook Dillian Whyte a little bit. Dillian Whyte's a good fighter, a very good fighter, but Fury under, I suppose, Andy Lee and Sugar Hill Stewart, he's a better fighter than we've ever seen. And these last two fights that he's had with Wilder, he's been fantastic. I think the Fury wins that fight, and I think that he wins it convincingly.
And away from results and predictions, I think this is so important for the sport, and a heavyweight who resonates not only in the UK but across the United States. As you've both been saying, Anthony Joshua has never yet anyway really cracked it across the United States. But this deal that Tyson Fury signed with Top Rank, you have to salute, whether it's Bob Arum or, as he often says now, the younger bucks beneath him, who've pushed the Tyson Fury story through all their powerful outlets and online and elsewhere around the United States. He's become monumental over there. So Tyson Fury fights now, whoever's in the opposite corner, are events. They're not just fights, they're huge events. And that's really, really important. He's revived interest in the heavyweight division in the United States, where all sport is so insular, and it's so rare that Americans follow anyone who isn't one of their own, who isn't flying the Stars and Stripes and singing the Star Spangled Banner. I think it's a great story.
He was on my undercard not that long ago.
I know.
That's a story and a half, isn't it?
A story and a half, yeah.
Look at this. Look what he's doing now. He's on no one's undercard for the rest of his life, by the way. But
at least, Carl, he wouldn't ever do to you that harrowing story you told me. Was it about Thomas Hearns ignoring you when you were trying to get a picture of him?
He didn't ignore me. It was Bruce Willis.
Well, he's not a boxer, but...
Yeah, I know, but I called him Mr. Willis. It was very nice, and I thought he didn't hear me. Mike. He blanked me twice, and he was actually speaking to Chris Eubank Jr. at the time. And I was like, I feel wounded here. Anyway, went on out the back, and it was at Mayweather McGregor, and I seen Tommy Hearns, and he was on his own. He was with his guy, whoever it was looking after him, but there was no one else around. Mr. Hearns, I called him again. Can I get a photograph? I got the photograph, but when I asked him, he went, I'm fed up with this. Leave me alone. I'll take the photograph, but leave me alone. And not long before that fight, I was Ring Magazine Fight of the Year. I wanted to say it to him. Do you know who I am? But he didn't. He didn't have a clue.
Mike, it gets even better than that. When Carl did the Parker and Chisora commentary with us on 5 Live, young Jack showed up at ringside and he said to me, there's a problem with Carl. I said, what's the matter? He said, he's missed his flight. I said, what's that? Get on a late one. He said, you'll get on a later one. So eventually Carl gets there, and I say, well, what happened? So he taps his pocket. He said, I tap my pocket because I keep my ID in my pocket at Belfast. So he goes to Belfast Airport. He thinks it's his ID. It's not. It's a pack of paracetamol, right? So it turns out you can't show paracetamol as ID. And I said to him, and you'd agree, I said, well, why didn't you just say surely you know who I am. So he doesn't say, do you know who I am? He goes back to his house and gets his pass. Surely you just say, Google. I've done it. Google me, I say. You don't know who I am, just Google me.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. Do you know what? I thought about pulling that card or playing that card, but might have been okay in Belfast, but getting back, how was it getting back from Manchester?
That's
just told me to go away.
Listen, you make a good point. Now, Mike, the pair of you, we got to mention a few fighters, odd things that might happen. These are not necessarily
no shopping list.
No shopping list. No, but even though we get sometimes criticised for not having a shopping list, a man that entertained us quite a lot last year, and his improvement. I think Carl said on the pod last week that his improvement was the best in certainly in British boxing, possibly in world boxing. Conor Benn against Adrian Broner. It's moving closer and closer. I'm a massive fan of this fight. I really am, Carl.
Me too. And listening to Conor and Nigel, his dad, on that podcast, I was liking everything I was hearing. And Conor Benn, he's someone who literally really talk about living the life. He does live the life. He's always in the gym. He's really been learning on the job. And I think he understood it at the start that he wasn't very good. And he's worked on things that he's had to improve on.
Slap, said Nigel. You used to slap.
But I think the improvement has been unbelievable, massive. And he's come on leaps and bounds. I think the Broner fight's a good fight. I think that he wins the fight, and I think he'll win it comfortably enough. But I liked what his dad said about the other names he was mentioning. Yeah. Throw him in with Terence Crawford. Throw him in with Earl Spence. See what happens. If he loses, so what? Yeah. And that's a good. I like that attitude. Yeah. You don't have to. He can still improve. He can still get big fights off the back of it. It doesn't mean his career's over if he loses to one of them guys, which I think he would at this stage. Certainly, they beat him, both of them. But I like the attitude from both.
And he talks about learning lessons. Yeah. When he was floored twice in the first round against an unknown Frenchman, Cedric Payneau, at the end of 2017. I think it was his 10th or 11th fight.
It was about that, yeah.
And he said that
changed his life
all week during the build-up. He said it just this week or last week before his most recent fight, a couple of weeks ago now. He said that in the build-up to that particular fight, which was almost a really bad setback early in his career, he said that he'd booked this holiday to Miami and he was already on the beach. So while his mind was on the beach, his butt was on the canvas.
Yeah.
And he learned from that. And we did some commentary with him, Carl, last year. Do you remember, Steve? It was behind closed doors, so we were in one of these enclosed boxes about 50 yards away from the actual ring because of all the COVID restrictions. And when we came off air, and I mean the moment that we put the mics down on the table, he turned to us and said, "Is there anything I can do better?" Before there'd been any kind of post-program review, he just asked, "Is there anything I can do better?" And that to me just reflected, I think, what all that I hear about what he does in the gym. He's always asking questions. He will spar with anybody that Tony Sims decides he should be sparring with, and just gives it everything. And I thought part of his growth was shown when he knocked Algieri out, and Algieri was out on his feet. And just as he fell, he motioned to throw another right hand and then stopped himself. And I thought that was great composure.
That would have gone in 2 years
that really
ago.
frenetic. Yeah, 10 fights ago, he'd have hit him on the canvas.
His dad would have done it. His dad would have threw the second punch.
Yeah, there was a great line, and I don't want to look back, but there was a great line from Conor talking about people saying I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, and you saw live during the interview Nigel look at him as if to say, "Well, what do you mean? Like, hold time out, silver spoon? You're joking!" Like Nigel was genuinely. It was like the first time I'd ever heard it. It was like genuinely disgusted that people thought that. Then it turns out that his dad was giving him 50 quid a week when he first came here when he was like 18 years of age, and he was having to live with his nan in a room, tiny room with a tiny bed, as he pointed out, and get on the train at 4:30 in the morning to go for the run. So a long way from a silver spoon.
Chris Avalos said that about me. I was born with a silver spoon. I don't think I had a plastic.
Is that what he said?
I don't think I had a plastic spoon or a wooden spoon in my house.
Wow. He read that one wrong.
He got it wrong. There's a nice area. I'm from Tigers Bay. There's a nice area just outside Belfast called Helens Bay, and I think you might have got them two places mixed up.
Well, Chris.
That fight against Chris Avalos, my God, that was your first defence, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
He's a good fighter, Avalos.
Let me tell you, I was thinking
really
of that with you alongside commentating for 5 Live, just a few feet from me on that fight a couple of weeks back, Chisora against Parker. the noise and the return of fans and the presence of fans being so important, I actually thought back to that night. It was called the Odyssey Arena at the time, and that's about as loud as anything I've heard in an indoor arena. And that's half the size of the Manchester Arena, by the way. But my God, it was absolutely deafening. I like, the feed in my earphones to be really loud, and that was one of those nights when it hurt your ears. But just very briefly before we move on, because it wouldn't be one of these podcasts without a tangent, Steve. We talked about Conor Benn, but everybody's loving the work you're doing, Carl, for BT. But would you rather do the stuff sitting away from the arena with Steve and Paul Dempsey, or would you rather be sat ringside?
No, sat ringside. That was brilliant. I love the stuff. I love the stuff that I'm doing with BT. But if we could do that and replicate it and bring it a little bit closer, I seen there was who was the fight? David Hay and yourself, and they had the desk pretty close to the ring.
Same thing, yeah.
Who was that?
That was great. That was Yard against.
Yeah, why not do that?
What I do, Carl, all the time is I'll ask permission and come down. So when we did things like Deontay Wilder and Fury, the first fight in Los Angeles, and I was doing interviews in the ring, but our studio was right up in the gods at the Staples Center, and I went down for the fight. I always come down for the fight, even if I missed the first 30 seconds of chat. That's what you should do. Sorry to talk shop on a pod, but hey, this is the way the business works. It's not magic. It's just three adults discussing a living and paying a mortgage.
Is that your John Fury again?
Yeah, no, that's a new one. I've got a new voice. I've got a new voice in the repertoire. Anyway, just ask Carl. Just say, do I have to sit up here? 200, 500 feet away, and just come ringside. There's always a bit of space down at ringside. That's what I did. Now, we're moving on again. Last week's pod was the longest we've ever done, 11 hours and 14 minutes. Absolutely beautiful stuff as well. Every single second of it, if you don't mind me saying so. And this one will be slightly shorter. Mike, I know that there's one fight that you particularly like, and it's a fight you particularly like, Saul Canelo Alvarez and the WBC. I was really surprised when they gave him permission to move to cruiserweight to fight their cruiserweight champion, Makuba. I was really shocked.
Is that a joke?
It was a joke. I'm surprised I just didn't give him the belt. but by the way, it works because this is what Carl's getting at. We recorded a who wins the fight, the Saul Canelo Alvarez or Caleb Plant about 5 weeks before the fight, and Carl was just big. He's going to fight a cruiserweight. He's going to go up the cruiserweight. He's going to find a cruiserweight he wants to fight. 2 months later, it happened.
Hey. Imagine if one of the British fighters beats Joe Smith and becomes light heavyweight champion. There's another possibility.
That's how we get him here.
Major fight against Canelo Alvarez, and that might happen even within this year.
People laughed at me when I mentioned the jump in the cruiserweight.
Not me, son.
And I'll tell you why I thought it. I think that at light heavyweight, you've got the danger. He's already won a title at light heavyweight, but the danger man is Beterbiev, and I don't think he wants to fight him. Like everybody else in the round in weight divisions, none of them are mentioning his name, Canelo included. He is a horrible fight for anybody. But I just had an idea he was going to jump the cruiserweight. I thought maybe someone like Breedis, who's a tougher fight than Makubu.
Yeah, much tougher.
I think Makubu is a clever choice, but I get laughed at. I get mocked. People were calling me an idiot. What do you know? It's stupid. He can't go up the cruiserweight. He's 5'7". What are you talking about? But he done it. Tris Dixon actually said it on the TV, but
I'd recorded your bit first. Trish was most upset with that.
Yeah, he was upset about it. So he thought he was the one that claimed this. It was actually me beforehand.
Actually, it was you. Now, before we move on and finish the pod, and it's been great looking back last week and looking forward this week, let me ask the pair of you just to come up with one guy you'd like to see this year do something, or one woman. They could be an amateur that's not turned pro yet. It could be a pro about to get there. But I'll start with you, Mike.
For me, it's the same man. He's now 22. I've been talking about him on the pod for 3.5 years now. Keyshawn Davis, who is now set fair on his professional career. He just moved away to box at the Olympics, won a silver medal against the Cuban beaten in the final, Andy Cruz. He'd already beaten him in the World Championships and beaten him in the Pan American Games. So you might wonder why I'm not getting excited by Andy Cruz. Well, as we know, up to now, it might change very soon in Cuba, but up to now, if they want to turn pro, they've got to defect. But also, I happen to think, looking at those fights, and the Olympic final was won only on a split decision, I think that Keyshawn Davis has got the style that is much better suited to the professional ranks, and he really excites me. Just his fluency, his punch picking, his defence is very clever. He reads opponents, and I don't mean the 4 professional fights he's had. I'm talking about high quality amateur contests that he's had going through to the finals of major multi-nations events, as well as the World Championships and the Olympic Games. I think he's a stunning talent.
I'm not copping out here, because that was actually the guy I was going to talk about as well, and we spoke about it off air, but it's not that I don't have anyone else. He was the one that I liked, and he's a lovely kid as well. He fought in my undercard when I fought Jamel Herring in Dubai. He's a really, really nice kid, but them few professional fights and then going and doing what he done in the Olympics, having to hold your weight all the time and stuff, that would be difficult for a lot of pros to do, because we crash the weight and we hold it. I literally made super bantamweight and featherweight for an hour. That's all. I was 122 or 126 pounds for 1 hour. That was it. And then I'm rehydrated and stuff. So to hold the weight throughout a tournament like that after fighting as a pro is commendable.
Because what happened in Rio, remember, Mike, when they allowed the pros in, the pros all fought 2 or 3 weights above where they were, because they couldn't handle that weight, so they weren't as controlled as Keyshawn Davis. Keyshawn Davis. Let me ask you this. Before I'll throw mine at you. Mine's the big Uzbek, Jalilov, the gold medalist. And, okay, gold medalist, you might say, I can't wait for him to turn pro. Too late. He's had 9 fights already. He's knocked out 9 people. I think he's had a couple since the Olympics. I like him a lot. Not just because he's the big Uzbek, and that's a great name. I like him because he's a good southpaw, a really good southpaw. And he is big. That's why he's got the nickname. But he's smart, Mike. And he's still relatively young. I mean, if I'm a heavyweight, if I'm a heavyweight, a good heavyweight, no matter how good you are, if I'm Usyk, if I'm Joshua, if I'm Wilder, Fury, White, I've got Jalilov somewhere in my mind when I go to sleep. And if I'm in the middle of all those heavyweights, the Joe Joyce and Down situation, I've got a large part of Jalilov each night I go to sleep. Because if he's not haunting heavyweights, then you need to look yourself in the mirror. I mean, is that a fair comment? Am I overplaying the big Uzbek?
If I'm 34 and 35, I'm thinking, hopefully I'll be out of the game by the time he gets to the top.
I'm telling you, he is. Yeah, no, exactly, yeah. So if you're at 34, 35, 36, I saw things that he did in the Olympics. Good fights, hard fights, and I saw him look good doing it. I like him a lot, and I've spoken to Fraser quite a lot about him, who's had a couple of fights with him, beat him a few years ago, and then got stopped on about 37, so two cuts that needed 37 stitches. I like the kid, Jalilov. He's a big danger.
The rise of these kind of Uzbeks, Kazakhs, all the Eastern Bloc countries, former Soviet countries, has been meteoric in recent years. It's been massive, and there's so many good fighters there. And you just talked about it a second ago. Imagine the Cubans didn't have to defect the term professional. The amount of Cuban fighters, unbelievable amateurs who just get lost because they don't defect and people forget about them. Imagine Cuban boxers, top-class amateurs, were allowed to turn professional. What a nation of fighters the Cubans are.
My fear from a selfish boxing fan point of view is that if they are allowed the freedom to move, the boxing system, the sporting infrastructure there will collapse in Cuba, and that system won't be in place. And therefore you won't have those great amateurs coming through. I mean, it was a joy to watch them again it really was. In Tokyo. They dominated in a way that they probably hadn't, Steve. You're always watching every single contest at the Olympics, but probably since 1992 when they won, I think, 7 gold medals. It was great to see. It had that feel to it.
It was like a vintage, yeah.
And you had that real feeling that every Cuban who clambered through the ropes was going to be really, really hard to beat.
They were special.
And what's fascinating, still no women.
Yeah, no, the no women's one thing, but I'll throw something back at you that we probably should have done last week, but we forgot to do it last week. Hey ho, we're only human beings. How about this, Mike? We talked last week about the potential end of Olympic boxing or boxing at the Olympics. I wonder if you take that away from the Cubans, because that is their goal. Baseball's good, high jump, long jump, triple jump, track. They can do all of that. We know they can. They can play volleyball all day long. They're competitive in lots and lots of things. Boxing is God. Amateur boxing is the only boxing, and the God of all gods, the top place you can be is the Olympic podium. You take that away, I wonder if the door opens then on the professional game. That's for a discussion at the end of 2022.
But as we speak, Steve, in 2022, a decision will be made in 2023. But as we speak right now, boxing will not be at the Olympics in 2022. 28. And that's not doom-mongering. It's that at the moment is a fact. It has to prove that it has the correct governance, and they're now looking for transparency in funding, because there's this huge donation that's been made by a Russian energy company to IEBA, now called IBA, and the IOC are looking into that. So they're looking into the governance, they're looking into the credibility of judging still, and they're looking into the funding and the finances of this governing body. And look, they haven't ruled it out, but as we speak right now, the Olympics in 2028 will not feature boxing.
I refuse to end on that note. I refuse to enter 2022 with Costello telling me there'll be no Olympic boxing, even though he's talking the truth. I refuse to end that way. So let's lift it up. We've mentioned an awful lot of fights here today, but give me one that we haven't mentioned that you would like to see in 2022. Carl, you go first.
Well, the lightweight division for me at the minute is super hot. So many quality fighters, and I'd love to see them all fight each other. But a real standout fight for me from that division is Tank Davis against Lopez.
Wow.
Both of them have characters that a lot of people don't like. It doesn't really care who loses in that fight, but they're quality fighters, spiteful fighters. For me, that is a fight that if I seen that in 2022, I'd be delighted. That is a huge fight and a massive fight for boxing.
I'm going to wander back into Carl Frampton territory, super featherweight, where he ended his career against Jamel Herring, the man who beat him, Shakur Stevenson. I want to see him against the man that Carl mentioned last week, Oscar Valdez, in a unification fight at super featherweight. Love that. And potentially then, at the end of 2022, Shakur Stevenson might move up to join the boys that Carl's just mentioned in the lightweight division. So real excitement around Shakur Stevenson, the man who first put me on to Keyshawn Davis when he tweeted a little video of him at the Chemical Cup in Germany in 2018.
Can you believe we did a review last week and a preview this week, and we haven't mentioned, like we've mentioned for the last 3 years, Spence and Crawford. That's how much it's gone under our radar. That's how much we don't care. I'll throw a domestic one at you, and I really like it. I don't give a monkey's what the bauble is or what's at stake. Anthony Yarde, Joshua Barazzi. There's something about that fight. I've liked that fight since before Yarde got beat by Lyndon Arthur. I like it even more now. I want to see what Joshua Barazzi's got left, because we haven't really seen what he's got. I want to see where we go with him. I just really like the idea of Yarde and Barazzi. That's a all British, made in British, has the stamp of approval.
I've got to tell you, if we ranked those three that we've just mentioned, that would be number one for me.
There's just something about it, and let's keep it, as much. I mean, the super feathers, the lightweights, the welters, the half of the middles, the light middles, the amount of great American international fights that we've got. You've got 25, 30 fights there. I agree, but then every now and again we can throw up British ones like that, and they're beautiful.
There's one we've missed, and I know what you're going to say. It's not an all British affair, but it's a Britain versus Ireland, Mick Conlan versus Lee Wood.
How do we miss it?
And what a fight that is as well. It's made, so that's
Is it the Garden? Is it the Garden?
No, I think they're talking about back in the UK. No, I don't really know. The Garden was mentioned, but I think it's going to happen in the UK, and that's what I believe. But I think it's a hard fight to call. I think Mick Conlan's performance against TJ Doheny was very, very good. I really liked what I saw. Lee Wood against Kanzu was a brilliant performance.
Staggering.
That's a cracking fight.
He's really strong at featherweight. Yeah, really strong.
I tell you what, we thought last year was good, said Steve Bunce. The next year is going to be good, said Steve Bunce. Add that in any December, going back about 15 years, and I just feel that way. Mike, it's a pleasure and a delight always to have you back.
Oh, it's a joy to be back. Thanks for having me, mate.
What a joy looking back. And Carl, it's always a pleasure.
Thanks, man.
And a delight. We've had some fun, and sorry about the trade talk about BT, but that's what you need to do. Just tell the producers you want to go down to ringside with me, and you can sit with me, and we can have a bit of a chin wag at ringside. What a year it was last year, but what a year we've got coming up. I'm not even sure where to start. It's been absolutely beautiful. You listened last year, you listened the year before, and the year before, and the year before. Continue listening in 2022. Enjoy yourself over New Year's Eve or New Year, depending on what you can do and what you can't do. But just enjoy yourself, and we'll see you in the new year. And it all starts on January the 15th, and it will continue right up until about the 19th of December 2022.
Let's get ready to rumble!
5 Live Boxing.